Great to have you with us on this edition of Off the Record with the latest Democratic candidate for the U.S. Senate. He is joining us. He is Abdul El-Sayed. Our lead story, the governor continues to play defense on that Oval Office visit, and Mike Cox wants to be governor. Around the OTR table, Chuck Stokes, Lauren Gibbons, and Rick Pluta. Sit in with us as we get the inside out. Off the Record.
Production of Off the Record is made possible in part by Bellwether Public Relations, a full-service strategic communications agency partnering with clients through public relations, digital marketing, and issue advocacy. Learn more at bellwetherpr.com. And now, this edition of Off the Record with Tim Skubick.
Thank you very much. Welcome to Studio C, Off the Record, another edition. Mike Cox wants to be governor. Were you surprised?
No. It had been rumored for quite some time that he was going to throw his hat in the ring. He just made it official. And it's not unexpected. I mean, he was close to that position when he was Attorney General for this state. He's always had it in his blood. He's been out for a while, made some money, I presume, and now wants to jump back into the public light. And his wife, of course, was in a powerful position with the Michigan Republican Party. So it's in the family blood. Now, he's the third Republican so far to jump into it. So he's got competition. It's going to mean an interesting primary race, and we're going to have a battle on both the Democratic and Republican side in the primary. And of course, we can't forget there's an independent in there, right?
Yeah, whatever his name is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's certainly, like Chuck said, not a surprise. He has been putting himself out there again. You saw him testifying in Lansing a few weeks ago, criticizing some of the anti-Trump lawsuits that Attorney General Nessel's been a part of. So he's been, getting back into the spotlight to some extent, even before the announcement. But yeah, it remains to be seen, how well he does compared to people who have been in it throughout the Trump era. He's coming in from quite some time ago, but he might have some play here.
Well, and an opportunity to reinvent himself, and as everybody here knows, that the dynamics in a crowded primary are different than one where it's kind of a one-on-one, or there's someone who's a field clear, which we don't have in either of the parties. And so, what's his lane, and does that give him at least a plurality of the Republican primary vote?
Well, he was a victim of the multiple candidate thing before, finishing third and a fifth in a
another race in which he was not alone.
Well, no, absolutely not. I mean, if it had been one-on-one, Rick Snyder and Mike Cox, his chances of winning might have gone up, but it wasn't that way. Look at this guy's making a lot of money. That U of M settlement that he had allowed him to put $1 million of his own money into the fund. Why not just enjoy life?
Well, that's going to be a good question for him, because you oftentimes wonder, once you've gotten out of politics, you make a lot of money, you're doing well, why do you want to get back in with those barbs and headaches and things that you can't control? There are lots you can control, but there's always surprises coming around the corner. I think what's going to be interesting is how does he position himself to try to win the primary, because we know the primary is about MAGA with the Republican Party and Donald Trump and endorsement. And early indications from his press release was that he's embracing the types of things that President Trump likes. So it looks like he's going to try to paint himself as a real conservative wing of the party. Now, if that works, because it worked for Mike Rogers to get through the primary when he ran, but then when you get to the general, you have to start repositioning yourself a little bit. So he has to be careful.
Mike has a public service gene. There's no question about that. So, more power to him to get in.
Yeah, certainly. And
didn't his wife have a dust-up with Donald Trump?
So that's something that he might have to.
If you looked into the commercial, there was a picture of his wife with Donald Trump. Do you suppose that massages what happened?
Potentially, yeah. And it has been a long time, and we've seen quite a bit with President Trump that he is willing to look past, past dust-ups, even with Mike Rogers, for example. Mike Rogers had been a pretty harsh critic during the 2020 election cycle. So there's always a possibility. That said, everybody's going to be going after after that lane. That's the easiest lane to get through the primary.
You can have a history of criticizing and battling with Donald Trump, and as long as in the end you go and bend the knee, then all is forgiven. You don't see the president, turning around and brushing someone off, especially if he thinks that they might be a winner.
But what difference does it make if we have 6 cars in one lane?
That's a great question. Who's the breakout? Who put eliminating the income tax on the table? And everyone is looking for, what's the breakout issue? What's something that will separate me from the pack, especially when everybody is at least trying to, paint themselves into the MAGA lane.
The biggest hurdle that I think Mike Cox has to get over is reacquainting himself with a generation that doesn't know who he is.
In fact, I don't think he mentioned he was AG in the commercial. Did I miss that? He never said I was a Michigan Attorney General.
He's a crime fighter.
Yeah.
But so was Dick Tracy. Okay, I mean,
But there's a whole
I don't know where you're going with that.
Neither did I. It just came out.
There's a young generation who's probably saying, Mike who? Mike Cox who? What did he do? Where did he come from? He hasn't been in the public eye from an elected position in a long time. Yes, he was in the public eye because of the lawsuits and stuff like that with the University of Michigan.
It's, primaries are decided by a much thinner swath of voters than generals. And most of the candidates in a primary are largely unknown to the public. That's part of the challenge, is going out and presenting yourself and then hoping that there's not something in your history that's going to blow the doors off that after you're in.
He'll get to spend some of that money he's made. Or somebody else's money. Yeah.
All right. Well, the governor went down to Detroit this week and was still playing catch-up on what happened in the Oval Office. The infamous picture of her holding up the book in front of her face. What's the fallout from this, if any? Is this a 3-day story, or is this a Michael Dukakis riding in the tank with the helmet moment? Crickets.
Neither. I mean, it's not a 3-day story. That picture is going to live on in eternity and be part of her history. Whether or not it's a significant part of her history going forward, I think, is the question that you're really trying.
Let's try that on for a second. That's the one you want to answer. Go for it.
Okay, well, and the answer is an absolute maybe. That if there is something else, Whitmer is caught in, a literal vice, where on the one hand she was that woman from Michigan who, battled Donald Trump, and now she's trying to, take the position of being a little bit more forgiving. And then, when things happen, like the 2 weeks that, we've just had, it's, what's that sweet spot in the middle where you can go up against the administration on tariffs without directly battling Donald Trump and suffering the consequences?
If I had come to this table in, say, October 2024 and said, hey, you know what? President Trump is going to get elected, and Governor Gretchen Whitmer is going to hang out in the Oval Office with him, I would have been laughed out of this room.
Yeah, you would.
And yet that is what happened. That is where we are.
You're too sweet. We would have never laughed you out of the room.
I appreciate that, but it would have been preposterous sounding at the time. But now here we are. You can see what she's trying to do, right? She's trying to prevent the brunt of the tariffs from coming to Michigan. She's trying to make headway in a state where she has to convince the Republican Speaker of the House if she wants to get anything through both chambers of the legislature. So she's trying to make these inroads. That said, she lost control of the narrative when she was brought into this press conference, asked to answer questions. Trump is covering issues that she probably doesn't want to deal with.
Speaker Matt Hall is in the room, too.
Speaker Matt Hall is in the room as well.
Between them.
So yeah, it is an odd pairing. And certainly a lot of Democrats questioned whether that was a good idea, especially if she's considering further aspirations. So I think the dust is still settling. Like, will it end up working? Who knows?
Look, at the picture could have been worse. She could have done this in front of the camera lens, which sends a completely different message.
But she has a tough needle to thread here, because she is trying not to provoke a confrontation with the sitting president. Everybody knows where she stands on issues. Everybody knows where Trump stands on issues, but they have to work together. She's the leader of the state. He's the leader of the country. And she's in the last term of being governor. She wants to go out on a high. There are key issues, which you just enumerated, that she's up there fighting for. She invited Speaker Hall to go to Washington to be a part of this. I just recently interviewed him. He waxed eloquently about their relationship. So right now, Speaker Hall and the governor are getting along well. They are both trying to carve that lane to get the things that they want. They say for the people of Michigan, and they found some areas that they can work together.
And
now,
right now
does it blow up at some point? We'll see.
Right now is the key phrase to what you just said.
Absolutely.
And she had a credible explanation for putting the blue folder up in front of her face, which was she was surprised. She wasn't expecting TV. She didn't think she wanted to be TV.
Taken.
Right.
Didn't want my picture taken.
Let me see,
there
was also in the Oval Office not wanting their picture taken.
But there was also the picture, of her just standing against the wall, looking like she wanted to somehow melt into it.
Or the vintage.
And the one where she bumped.
Yes,
reached over
exactly.
and bumped
The
the
vintage
speaker.
picture.
And so we actually do have a good relationship. I think her quote was, "We get along 70% of the time."
Mr. Hall might be doing the governor a disfavor by continuing to laud all of this stuff on her. She doesn't need another Republican saying good stuff about her with her Democratic base. Yes or no?
Do you think maybe he knows that?
Probably, I'm not going to answer that question. All right, let's talk about the Supreme Court losing money by the Republicans in the House. What's going on?
Well, they haven't lost it, at least not yet.
Symbolically.
But the threat is out there that the Supreme Court made a decision following a series of decisions that lifers, mandatory lifers, that, following a U.S. Supreme Court decision as well, mandatory life without parole, automatic life without parole for younger defendants, 20 and younger, is not constitutional. And so now they're entitled to resentencing hearings, and prosecutors have to make decisions about whether or not they're going to once again seek life without parole. And this is, a no-win, that, it can't be ignored that there are victims and survivors here who have to go through the whole process again, and that's anguish. That
and the families,
and like I said, the survivors, and also that the inmates, the people who are serving, have to prepare for this, and that means that prosecutors and defense attorneys have to prepare for this.
So what do the House R's do?
The House R's said, Supreme Court, we're going to take that money from you to accomplish that, which means that they're trying to at least bend the direction of the Supreme Court based on a decision that they don't like.
Well, I think it's pretty clear here that Republicans' lack of success in getting their Republican-nominated justices on the court is catching up to them. This was not a close decision. It was 5-2, certainly a pretty a divided partisan decision. But there are a majority of Democrats on the Supreme Court, or Democratic-nominated justices, excuse me. But that's the reality of the situation. So Republicans are trying to wield what power they have, seeing if they can do that from the appropriations perspective.
Well, it makes a statement, but when it gets over to the Senate, assuming that it does, it's probably DOA.
Sure.
Yes.
Ignored.
But it's at least a political move that they're trying because, as you said, it's the only power that they have right now. They are seriously outnumbered on the Michigan Supreme Court, but they're fighting back with the only tool that they have, and that is messing with the purse strings.
Speaking about fighting, this gentleman wants to fight to get a seat in the U.S. Senate. Let's see why. Doctor, nice to have you back on Off the Record.
Always a privilege to be here with you, Tim, and thank you for creating a space where we can have real conversations.
Well, let's see what we can do here. All right, so in your spot that you announced that you were running for the U.S. Senate, you talked about fighting the president and Elon Musk. Your governor is trying to thread that needle that we talked about. Is she on the right course?
Well, look, I'll tell you this. I think right now, when you talk to folks, they watch as our Constitution is being bent in half by a presidential administration. I think we do need folks who are going to fight back in D.C. I understand the governor's role is going to be different than what a senator's role is going to be. Her job is to look after the 43% of the federal budget that makes up, 43% of the state budget that comes from the federal government. And she's got priorities, and she's going about it her way. I'll tell you, for me, I think there are two parts to any political job. There's the procedural part, the things that you can do simply because you hold that role, but then there's also the leadership part. And I think what we're not seeing specifically out of enough members of Congress or in the U.S. Senate is the ability to leverage that leadership part to step up and fight back against what Trump and Musk are doing to our government, what they're doing to our Constitution, and what they're doing to our society.
So if you had been governor today, would you appear in the Oval Office to get stuff from Michigan?
I have a feeling I probably wouldn't have been invited, but we'll also just say that at the end of the day, I'm not governor. I can't tell you what 6 years on in leadership I would have been dealing with, and so I don't second guess somebody else's decision making. But what I can tell you is that for me, running for this seat in the U.S. Senate, my responsibility is going to be to leverage the role, like that constitutional role of an elected representative, to step up and fight back. These are not normal times, and we cannot act like they are.
Well, but if you look at the job of a senator or any member of Congress, that part of it is working to get things for your state in the federal budget. You just mentioned the numbers. That if you're going to tangle with an administration that is of the opposite party, especially if that party also controls the Senate, then you could find yourself in a problem in the budget process. How do you thread that needle?
Yeah, look, I'll tell you this. Right now, it's rather clear that this administration is not serious about the role, the constitutional role of the Senate or the House. They're not going about trying to achieve their ends by passing legislation. What they're trying to do is run roughshod over the constitutional process and over Congress. And frankly, Republican members of Congress are letting them do it. I think you're right that if this was a normal situation, the responsibility is to work very closely with the administration to try and get budget priorities done. But there is nothing about the way that this administration is operating that tells me that they're serious about actually working with Congress. Just look at the way that they've used executive actions in ways that are way past what the precedent has been.
From a policy perspective, outside the budget, outside engaging in combat with a far-right administration, if you could choose one bill that you would sponsor and work for, what would it be?
Well, Rick, you know I'm a doctor by training. I got into politics not because I dreamt of being a politician. I wanted to be a doctor. And then as I was doing this work of training to be one, I came to realize that the biggest challenge we have in healthcare isn't what we can do in a patient's room. It's whether or not a patient can get to the room in the first place. And so for me, guaranteed access to universal health coverage based on a strong government program, as they do in every other high-income country in the world, that has been my whole priority. I literally wrote the book on Medicare for All. That being said, I don't want to lose sight of the fact that there is no health without wealth. And right now, people feel like they're being priced out of their lives and livelihoods. And we have a responsibility to step up and take on the corporate powers, be they in healthcare or in groceries or in food manufacturing or in other manufacturing that are dominating our governance. And so there would be two. I know you asked me for one. Medicare for All would be my baby, but the second one would be legislation to take on the power of corporations to influence our politics, because that's what I think is corrupting our ability to keep them from colluding, raising prices, and pricing people out.
Doctor, so the voters, understand what you're for and what you're against. Had you been in the Senate on the last most controversial vote, how would you, in terms of whether or not keep the government open, how would you have voted? Would you have sided with Chuck Schumer and Gary Peters, or would you have sided the way Senator Slotkin voted?
I would have sided against the contending resolution with Senator Slotkin. And I think what we're seeing here is a recognition that this is not business as usual. And I think sometimes when folks get elected to these jobs, obviously the thing you got elected to do is the procedural part of the job, the ability to vote. But the other side of it, though, is the ability to step up and represent your constituency. And I think folks are sick and tired of watching our politics get leveraged for the authoritarian tendencies of the president. And so I think you've got to lay it all down. And look, I think the challenge is, yes, if you vote, which functionally shuts down government, the worry is that you're going to get blamed for it. But the reality of it is, Republicans put so much into that CR that is outside the bounds of normal politics. That is their responsibility. They should have worked with Democrats. And if they're not willing to do it, then you got to be willing to throw down the gauntlet, because at the end of the day, you were elected to lead, you were elected to represent. This is not the system of government that we all signed up for.
So you don't buy the argument that to have voted the way Senator Peters voted would have given more power to the president, and therefore he could have done potentially more, quote unquote, damage?
No, I don't. And here's why. Look, I understand the argument that they're making.
Because he's not
I get
afraid to use the presidential power he has.
Clearly he's not. I mean, he's not afraid to go beyond the presidential powers he's got. But I think the issue here is that, yes, he has already arrogated to himself, tried to take on powers he doesn't have. You watched him literally tank the global economy over tariffs that didn't make sense in any sense of the word, and then pass a stock tip to his buddies so that the billionaires in this country could make $300 billion. I mean, this is a guy who's acting well out of bounds of normal politics. If he were to try and push all of the things he was trying to push into that CR to get it passed, and Democrats said, no, over my dead body, we're not going to let you cut Medicaid, we're not going to let you gut the federal government, I actually think that lands on him. And so I think we've got to remember that this job is two pieces. There's a procedural job, but there's also a leadership job, and you've got to be willing to take your argument to the American public.
In your view, how have the dynamics changed since the last time you ran for statewide office? Do you see this moment as a time where progressive ideals could make more headway?
Yeah, Lauren, I really appreciate the question, and I'll tell you this. When I ran back in 2018, I said something that people weren't quite ready to believe, which was that Donald Trump was not the disease, right? We were living in this world where we thought he was a mistake, right? This crazy thing had happened, and obviously the record would correct itself. This time, right, we understand that people voted for him again. He's not the disease. He's the worst symptom of the disease. The disease is a system of politics that allows people like him, right, billionaires and oligarchs, to take our government and forge our pain into cynicism. I think this time around, as I've had conversations leading up to the decision to run, I think people are ready to take that on and say, you know what? Yes, we have to fight against Trump, but you can't beat something with nothing. And so the question that Democrats, I think of all stripes, have to be asking themselves are, okay, what is that thing? And I think the problem that too often Democrats face is that we try to triangulate to a message that's perfectly inoffensive to everyone, including the corporate donors who tend to write checks to the party, right, in ways that leave us saying nothing at all, but then we say it with enthusiasm. So if you're out there saying nothing with enthusiasm, you just look ridiculous. And unfortunately, we've looked ridiculous in the past. I think right now, this is a time for clarity. It's a time for courage. And I think what I bring to the table is the ability to speak clearly, honestly, and directly to the pain that the public is feeling, and to turn that into public policy results. And so I look forward to continuing that conversation.
So in a state that went for Donald Trump, and this is obviously a practical question, you're making an impassioned argument for a moral aspect of it. How does that get you, should you make it to the general, to 51% in a state that went for Donald Trump?
Yeah, let's break down the math of that. So the most surprising aspect of Donald Trump's victory was that, fine, he won over the MAGA base. The MAGA base not voting for anybody with a D in front of their name, okay? Then he won over the country club Republicans. Yeah, and our play has always been maybe we can get a couple of them to maybe get out of the country club for a minute and vote for a Democrat. But you know what else he won? He won young men, disaffected young men. And the reason that they voted for Trump is because they were sick and tired of feeling like people weren't telling them the truth. And the thing about Trump is this: he is very good at identifying pain. He just takes that pain and forges it into cynicism. I think we've got to be true about speaking to people's pain and forging it into hope for something that can be better. And I'll tell you, there is no better person to win over disaffected young men than a relatively disaffected young man. And I think we have an opportunity, right, to speak directly to those folks about the issues that they face. And so I think there is a real pathway here in the general. But more importantly is this: we're trying to build a coalition of all types of people. Because here's the thing: our politics have been dominated by this idea that everybody's fighting everybody. And look, I'm willing to fight back against Donald Trump. I've got receipts on that. But it's not just about what you fight against. It's about what you fight for. And I think the problem is we haven't been telling people what we're actually fighting for clearly and directly. So I'm confident that in this primary, I'm going to have an opportunity to build on what we did in 2018, to continue the conversation with voters, and to forge that into a movement into the general election where we're able to get these young men who've been so frustrated and frankly pissed off at the state of the world to be like, hey, strength isn't that you beat up on people who you think are weaker than you. Strength is about standing up for what you believe in and building something that brings people together. And I think we can do that in this race.
In the past, you have not taken PAC money. Will you hold to that same position? And can you, quite honestly, go a year and a half and win this race without taking some kind of PAC money?
Yeah, so I won't take corporate PAC money. I'm happy to accept money from unions, for example, but it's the corporate PAC money, right? The money that comes from folks whose CEOs make $18 million a year. I'm not going to take it. And the reason I'm confident that I can do this is because I know that folks chipping in $5, $10, $15, that they've powered some of the biggest movements in our country. And to me, I'm asking for people's votes, so I'm going to ask people to fund this campaign rather than the corporations who we so assiduously try to tiptoe around and end up saying nothing at all because we're unwilling to deal with the ways that they've corrupted all of the systems of our lives. I just want to be clear about something. We get monetized every time we get sick. I want you to think about that, right? You get your pay garnished every 2 weeks or 4 weeks so that you can pay a deductible if you get sick. And it's that deductible that has created the situation where, as a country, we hold $225 billion in medical debt. That's bigger than the GDP of half of the US states. We can do better. But the reason we do this is because those same corporations end up funding campaigns, so you're not allowed to talk about it in the way that I just did.
Right, we're going to do an overtime second, but quickly, you're running against a state legislator, and when you appeared in this program the last time, you said that being an executive was better than being a legislator. Do you still hold to that?
I think what people are looking for is not just who can fight back, it's who can build in the future. I've got a lot of experience building government agencies and delivering.
But is your executive experience better than her legislative experience?
Well, I think that's for the voters to decide.
Well, but you said that the last time you were here. You said that was more important to have executive experience.
I was running for an executive role. Look, I think I have a lot of respect for State Senator McMorrow. I think what people are looking for is somebody who can make government work for people. And as an executive in government, I've done that.
Shall we continue the conversation?
Look forward to it.
All right, let's do closed credits first. All right, WKAR.org. Come on back for more of our conversation with the good doctor.
Production of Off the Record is made possible in part by Bellwether Public Relations, a full-service strategic communications agency partnering with clients through public relations, digital marketing, and issue advocacy. Learn more at bellwetherpr.com. For more Off the Record, visit WKAR.org. Michigan public television stations have contributed to the production costs of Off the Record.